real quick before we get this video started. I just wanted to say, I want to thank each and every one of you for watching, but I also noticed that I got 66.6% of you are not subscribed. So if you can subscribe, that'd be great. Make it so I don't have the devil's number as my non-subscriber view count. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Let's get to the video. Hey everyone! Today I wanted to remake my very first tutorial as a celebration of sorts for the 1 year anniversary of Dreams. Now before we get started, I want to say that this is published as remixable already. However, if you already have a character you wish to make a ragdoll, then I suggest following this tutorial instead. Also, the template has an extra feature, which is that the ragdoll is a live clone of the puppet, so if you don't have a character yet, you can use the template and sculpt onto the puppet and have it automatically update the ragdoll. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. First, obviously get the character that you'd like to ragdoll. Since we can't use the actual puppet to ragdoll because we cannot turn off the bone system, we will want to make a copy of the model. If you've seen my previous tutorial on making a ragdoll, you'd know we have to select all the model pieces of the puppet by scoping in, double-clicking the pelvis, and cloning it and ungrouping it from the puppet. However, there is a way we can improve this. Under the Tools section, there's a clone tool. If we select it first and then turn on Live Clone mode in the lower right corner of the screen, we can clone the model and have it automatically change to match any sculpting changes made to the original puppet. Now that we have the model cloned and separated from the puppet, go ahead and group all the pieces together and make the group movable. Then scope into the group, double-click the pelvis to select all the pieces, and open the properties. Make the pieces movable and collidable. This will make the model actually act like a ragdoll. Before you leave the group, however, deselect everything, make the pelvis not movable, and this will make it so the pelvis acts as an anchor for our group's position. Without making an anchor, the logic on the group will not move, but all the parts will, and this would be a problem. This next step is optional, however, doing this makes a much more realistic and believable ragdoll. We need to make it so the body doesn't twist and turn onto itself, as well as make sure the arms don't clip into the body. The best way to do this is to set the joints to be angle limited, as well as lock the rotation of the joints. We don't want to do this to all the joints, however, as it would make the model too stiff. I recommend editing these following joints: the shoulder joints, neck and head joints, thigh joints, and all the foot joints, as well as a few or all of the torso joints. You would modify these to lock rotation and have an angle limit of about 50 to 90 degrees, whatever you find better. Again, this step is optional, but will give a much better looking ragdoll in the end. Now that we have everything ready, let's move on to the logic. Fortunately, this logic isn't too hard to understand. First, let's do the logic for the puppet. Open the puppet microchip and place a new microchip down. Open the microchip and place 4 input nodes and 2 output nodes. The nodes are so we can easily control the ragdoll logic with other logic. The inputs are ragdoll, finish ragdoll, unragdoll, and ragdoll collision. The output nodes are is ragdolled and unragdoll. Now, before we get started with the logic, let's understand what we need to do. First off, we need to emit the ragdoll model, so we will need an emitter. We want the puppet to follow the ragdoll, so we will need a teleporter. We want to know if we are currently ragdolled, so we need to keep it as a state, so we need a counter. We also need to turn off the visibility and collision of the puppet, and we can easily do this with a keyframe. There are a few more pieces we will need later, but for now, let's get the basics going. Go ahead and hook up the ragdoll node to the counter count up input, and the unragdoll finished node to the reset input of the counter. We can use the counter full output to activate the keyframe, teleporter, and emitter. The unragdoll node is a pass-through, so the emitter can emit the wires to the logic of the ragdoll. So hook the unragdoll input node to the unragdoll output node. Now for the properties of the gadgets, for the keyframe, edit it so it turns off the movability, visibility, and collisions in the puppet's physics property menu. Make sure you are editing the puppet properties and not one of the sculpts in the puppet model, or else you'll end up not doing it correctly. For the emitter, make it emit the ragdoll. Set the emit speed to 0, turn off ignore parent speed, and set emit time to 0, and the emit mode to 1s. On the second page, turn on emit wires. For the teleporter, set the tag to follow to ragdoll, and turn on the match target orientation button. Use the grid to move the gizmo of the teleporter to the bottom middle of the puppet, making sure not to rotate it. This is technically done if all you want is for your character to ragdoll upon death, but if you want the character to unragdoll for something like a skateboarding game or getting up from an explosion, we need to do logic on the ragdoll itself. Go ahead and place a microchip onto the ragdoll. We're going to need a few things here for inputs and outputs to start. We need 2 inputs and 2 output nodes. The 2 input nodes are unragdoll and destroy. The destroy is simply there to destroy the ragdoll if needed for other logic. The 2 output nodes are finish ragdoll and ragdoll collision. We also need a tag for the teleporter to follow. Place one down and name it ragdoll like the teleporter's input box. Then place the tag gizmo on the bottom middle of the ragdoll, just like the teleporter gizmo on the puppet. The logic here is pretty similar to the puppet logic. We also need to know if we are unragdolling, so grab a counter. We want to know how much time it takes to unragdoll, so we need a timer. We need to animate the limbs back into the starting position, so we need a keyframe. And we need a destroyer to destroy the ragdoll when we are done unragdolling, or if we need to destroy it for any other reason. Then, for later, we need an impact sensor to tell the puppet logic we are on the ground. To start getting these working, let's first edit the keyframe to make the limbs go back into the starting position. All we have to do is tap L2 to rotate the limbs a bit one by one. We could do this with R2 to move it, but this actually makes it clip through the ground as well as put limbs up into the air at times. So make sure to rotate every limb except for the pelvis. We want to make it so it animates automatically, so set the power up time to about 3.5 seconds, as well as increasing the springiness. I didn't do this here, but I do at the end of the video. Next, hook up the unragdoll input to the count up input of the counter. Then plug the counter full output to the timer's start input, and the power input of the keyframe. Hook up the timer pulse output to the finish ragdoll output, as well as the destroyer. Hook up the destroyer node into the destroyer gadget. Lastly, hook up the impact sensor to the ragdoll collision node. Modify the properties of the timer to the same time of the power-up time of the keyframe. In my case, that's 3.5 seconds. Now, to finish up the basics, hook up the unragdoll output of the puppet logic to the unragdoll input of the ragdoll logic. Then plug the finish ragdoll output on the ragdoll to finish the ragdoll input of the puppet. Also, hook up the puppet collision output to the puppet collision input. Now, this logic is technically all set up to ragdoll whenever you like, but there are a few improvements we can make on the puppet logic. Let's make it so if we ragdoll and hit something like the ground, we unragdoll after a few seconds. Let's also make it so if the ragdoll keeps some of the puppet velocity when emitted. First, let's do the auto unragdoll, since it's the easiest. Simply grab a timer and hook up the puppet impact to the start timer input. Then, the timer finish pulse to the unragdoll output. Then, set the timer target time to however long you want it to take to unragdoll. To keep the velocity of the puppet on the ragdoll, we need to know how fast we are going, so get a movement sensor. From here, we could simply plug the velocity output to the emit speed of the emitter, but this would emit the ragdoll in the direction of the gizmo, and not the direction that the puppet is actually moving. The emitter has a way around this, which is the scene space direction input. This takes a 3-number input to signify how much in each direction the puppet is moving. To get this, we can also use the movement sensor, in combination with a combiner. Grab a combiner and set the mode to 3 numbers. Then open the properties of the movement sensor and plug the velocity X, Y, and Z outputs into the combiner's A, B, and C inputs respectively. Then plug the output of the combiner into the scene space direction input on the second page of the emitter properties. And there you have it, a functional ragdoll system. To test it, we can take input from the controller sensor and plug it into the ragdoll and unragdoll inputs of the ragdoll. But ideally, you would use this in tandem with death logic or falling logic or something else of the same sort. And again, as you can see, it is kind of a little bit buggy when getting up from the ragdoll, so increase the springiness of the get up animation keyframe. Once again, I'd like to take this time to thank my patrons: Christian Sanchez, Darius Galassin, Empty Chest, Mythic Marty, Patrick Keller, William Snyder, and Skylar Ruin. Once again, thank you all for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye!